Welcome back to the Laravel Podcast Season 4. Today we're talking to Wilbur Powery, a programmer at the Wilbur Group, and also the research assistant in the second edition of my book. And we're going to be talking about mail and notifications. Stay tuned. All right, welcome back to the Laravel Podcast Season 4. Today, I'm going to be talking to my friend Wilbur Powery, and we're talking about mail and notifications, and basically what it looks like for you to get the message from your system out to your users in some way, shape, or form. So before I dig any deeper into that, of course, I'm going to make him explain it to a 5-year-old. But first, Wilbur, can you say hi to the people and tell them a little bit about yourself?
Hey, everyone. Well, I'm a Laravel developer. I live in Costa Rica. I've been here for like the last 8 years or something. I'm not originally from here. I'm from Honduras. But yeah, I'm just as Costa Rican as anyone, I guess, here.
So I don't know what how Costa Rica's handling COVID right now, but do you go to the grocery store? Can I ask you how do you tell people what you do when you meet people at the grocery store question?
Well, honestly, let's see. I probably have been to like a grocery store like in this past year 3 times. I guess.
Okay.
Like we have the benefit here that like even though it's like not a developed country or anything, right? We still have like Uber Eats, so then we could get like groceries and like other stuff like directly to our home, right? So yeah, like I've not been in a grocery now for like the past 3 months, I think. Right.
Okay. So if you were to meet somebody in any normal context, how do you tell people what you do?
Well, I've had people ask me a couple of times, and when you say like that I'm a programmer or something, people here already know that like there's different types, right? So they always ask, well, do you work on like mobile apps, right? Or do you do like stuff like for Windows or something? Because that's something pretty neat about here, that like the technology space, you know, is actually pretty big, right? We have companies like Amazon, Microsoft, right? All of the antivirus like companies have offices here and stuff. So the technology space is pretty big here. So people already have like a decent understanding, right? About what a developer would do and stuff. Yeah.
Okay. And day to day, what's your actual work? You mentioned you're a Laravel programmer. Do you specialize in any particular type?
I mean, so my actual work, honestly, is pretty much always like Laravel stuff. I mostly work like as a full stack developer, right? Doing like backend stuff and also like front end stuff. I'm a pretty big Tailwind user, right? So if I would have to choose which part of the work I like best, I would probably still go back to like the PHP side, right? But I'm also a pretty big fan of like HTML, CSS, and Tailwind and other like technologies there.
Awesome. I love it. And you and I have a long friendship and a long working relationship. For those who don't know, Wilbur was I forget the term we used, but basically,
I think it was research assistant, I think.
Okay, that's right. Yeah. So when I wrote my first book, time came to update it, and I just said, I just don't have the time and the energy for this. And I say, Wilbur, what do you think about being the person who tells me everything that needs to be updated in the book? And I'll write it, but you do all the work. So he would follow all the changes that had happened in Laravel, you know, change logs and everything like that, and just say, okay, here, this chapter needs to change here, this chapter needs to change here, and then I would just write it. So I am eternally grateful to Wilbur for saving my sanity through that process. So, but let's talk about mail notifications.
Yeah.
So we have kind of two systems. One of them is notifications, which includes mail, and then the other one is like the mailables concept and stuff like that. So let's not separate them for the sake of explanation to a 5-year-old. We'll separate them in a second. But right now, let's just talk about the concept of sending notifications for your Laravel app via any of those systems. How do you explain that concept to a 5-year-old?
Right. Like the way I try to go about it is basically just in your application, right? You're going to have like certain things that happen that you want your user to know about, right? So that is when either an email, you know, a text message, or any other type of like way of notifying your user, right, that certain action happened, right? So I've used like other PHP frameworks in the past that didn't have, you know, the idea of like built-in like notification systems and other sort of things, right? Whereas Laravel now, it's like literally so easy to send off an email to a user whenever something happened, right? Or notify them about a custom order, or a new event they need to manage, right? Because you have, like Matt was explaining, right? We have mails and we also have notifications, right? And there's a pretty big difference or like ideology around each of them, right? And there's always people, you know, when I like investigate or like work on a new code base or something, I always have like the idea of when I would use a mailable or when I would use a notification, right? Like there's examples and scenarios where one makes sense and then the other one to me doesn't make much sense, right? Yeah.
So you mentioned, you know, like for the 5-year-old context, you talked about the idea of you're sending something to your users.
Yeah.
One of the things that's interesting to me about notifications is that idea of who you're sending the notification sometimes can be a little bit richer than we tend to think of. Like I'm sending a transactional message to Sally, the user. You know, so what are some contexts in which you found yourself like recognizing that the mailable or notification systems are helpful outside of just sending to a specific user? Is that something you've had much experience with?
Yeah, like so this is like, to me, one of the best things of the notification and mailable systems in Laravel, right? That you could send very, very easily like notifications to like a user you have right in your database, but it's also super easy to like route notifications to like a separate email you have. And that's something that we do a lot on some of the apps that I work on, where we have like this admin email, right? That we want to notify them something whenever like a special action happens on the app, right? But they are not necessarily like a user in our database, right? So then routing either mails or notifications to like the different addresses. And this could be email addresses, phone numbers, and anything, right? Laravel makes it super flexible in order to like be able to do those actions.
Yeah. And I've that's exactly what I was thinking. I've made a Slack channel that I send notifications to. So that's what we use to notify our company, hey, something's wrong, or made a Twitter account that you can send notifications to, right? So it's like sending something to the outside world through one of so many different channels, right?
Right. And like a good example of this is, so at one of the companies I work with, right, is it's called Wilbur Group. I'm pretty sure. Yeah, I'm pretty sure a lot of
they named it after
Laravel,
you,
yeah, I'm pretty sure a lot of like the Laravel community knows Jake Bennett, right? But he's like the, I guess, manager of like the developer department or whatever we could call it at this company, right? So I've been working with him closely for the past 2 years, and this idea of sending mailables and notifications to like email addresses or phone numbers, or as Matt was saying, Slack channels and stuff, we do that quite a lot, right? And with the Laravel notification patterns here, it's super easy to do that. Like it's crazy easy.
Yeah, and we're going to get into those in just a second. So when we talk about mail and notifications, the reason I specifically mention that is that, you know, as you know, you can send mail through the notification system, but there's like an entirely separate system. Let's spend, I think, probably most of today talking about notifications. So let's get that out of the way for just a second and talk about mail. Can you give just like a real quick intro, if somebody's never used Laravel before, what's the mail system? Outside of the notifications mail, what's mail, what's mailables? Kind of, can you just tell us real quick about that? And then we'll probably kind of spend the rest of the time on notifications.
Yeah, like so mail and mailables in Laravel are basically just like an abstraction of like a very complex library that, thanks to like the integration Laravel has built in, we don't have to use it, right? It's this Symfony component, if I'm not mistaken, called Swift Mailer, I think, right? So Laravel already has like this very pleasant abstraction to use around it, where if you want to send like a regular email to anyone, right, it's super easy. All you have to do is instantiate like this new class you create. Obviously, Laravel has like artisan commands to generate these mailable classes for you, right? And they basically have like 2 different types of mails you could send, right? There's like the regular, like bare boned, like just text mail, right? But for most of the apps, like if, for example, you get like a new Uber trip or something, right? You get this email from Uber with like this pretty template and stuff, right? Whereas it's not just like text, right? In a blank or in a white background, right? So we have the regular like bare bone text mailables in Laravel, that those are super easy. But the very neat thing about it is that we also have what we call markdown mailables, right? Where these are templates that have been designed, right, for you that you could use. And honestly, they're pretty good out of the box, right? And it's super easy to customize the template you want to use for these, right? But if you don't want to, I've seen many apps that or sites that I've signed up to that it's super easy to know if they're a Laravel app or not based on like the mail you get, right? Because most of the apps that I've seen, they basically don't even change the template, right? Because it's so good out of the box.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. So we've got two different types of mailables.
Right.
In the past, you would have this kind of like where people would send mail not using mailables, and they would like actually just build a mail thing.
Exactly.
And that was like the simplest version of that abstraction, right? Like there's an abstraction on top of Swift Mailer that makes it really easy for you to say mail to this person from that person subject. You're using kind of like fluent methods to build that. But these days, it's less common, and you're more usually using this thing that represents your email in a single class called a mailable.
Exactly.
That defines all these things, right? So what are some of the things, if I wanted to send a mailable, whether or not it was a markdown mailable? So you mentioned that I generate it, right? So there's PHP artisan make : mail, is it?
Yeah.
Or make : mailable. Okay.
Make :
and then
mail.
you just pass it the name of the thing. So what's like an example? Can we walk through an example of a mailable that you might generate? Like what's a thing that you could think of that you might send an email for?
Yeah, so I mean, a good example, I guess, that we could look at is, and I think it's even an example that's in the docs, is say you have this invoicing app or something, right? And whenever someone pays an invoice, you want to send an email off to like yourself or to some other person, right? Well, you would first have to run the PHP artisan make : mail command, right? And the first thing you have to give it is the name of the class, right? That or the name of the object you want to like represent this mailable thing, I guess, right? So in our case, I guess it could be like invoice paid or something, right?
Right.
So then that generates a class that we could find, like, I think the structure now is like app, and then you have a folder inside there, mail, right? And then
That's funny. I don't actually remember where it goes. So I believe you.
I think it is, yeah. And then so you would have an invoice paid class in there, right? That class is pretty simple, like for regular mailables, right? It just extends like a parent mailable class, I think. You have a constructor, and I think you have a handle method. I'm not mistaken the name of it, right? And all that returns is like a mail message instance, right? And for regular mailables, right, for the ones that don't use like a markdown template, it's super easy. You could set up like all of your email body within that class, right? You have like fluent method you could call to set like a subject, to set a line, to set like an action, right? And that's super easy. For most applications, that's all you need, right? Because the notifications or the emails you send off are like just alerting of something. So like regular text is good enough, right? So that's like the simplest way to start with the mailable. Now, there are other things you could do, like for example, in this example of invoice paid, right? You may want to actually have information about the invoice that was paid, right? So the way the mailable system works is in this constructor, I mean, that's in the class, you could pass in arguments in there, set them like as properties on this mailable class, and then it's basically just using that info, right? In the case where we don't have like a markdown template, or we don't even need a view, we could use the fluent methods to set up all of like the information, like the subject, the line, and everything, as I mentioned, right? And use that invoice eloquent model that we passed in as reference, right? And basically build out, and in this example, a good use of like the actual eloquent model could be getting like the total of the invoice that was paid, right? And other things.
In the subject or whatever.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's good. So when we get one of these classes, when we're sending it, I mean, it's hard to kind of talk through code over a podcast, right? But in the end, you're newing up an instance of that thing, of that mailable, to pass it into, your mailer method. And one of the things you can do, as you're saying, is you can inject things into the constructor. So let's say you're going to say new invoice paid, and then in parens, you're going to say that invoice that is actually paid so that you have access to it. And one of the things that's cool is that, it's just a constructor. It's just a PHP class, right? So you set it as an instance variable on your invoice paid class. And then, and so it turns out it's not handle, it's build in the mail. So in that build class, you now have access to use anything that's available available on that invoice in your subject or whatever, but also any public properties on this mailable is now available in the view.
Yeah.
Right. And
If you were to use a view, correct. Like anything you pass in from the constructor and you set that as a public like property on that class, that's automatically available in that mailable view, right? So it's different than the views you would use like in a controller or something, right? Where you have to actually pass in the info you want to that view. When using mailables, any public property set on that class is automatically passed in, right, by the framework itself.
Yeah, and you can chain on with if you want. So if you were to do in build, you do this, you could, but you don't necessarily have to most of the time.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, so before we move over to notifications, are there any other things that you think this abstraction makes really easy for you when you're sending mails that you want to chat about, that you think people might not know about?
I mean, there's quite a few things that, to me, mailables are super useful and easy to work with in Laravel, right? So, for example, if you decide, right, that it's good to use like a markdown template, right, for your emails, since that's not just regular text, right, in a white background, you want to see how the actual email looks, right? So I'm not sure in what version exactly this was released, possibly 5.7 if I'm not mistaken.
Sometime around then, yeah.
Yeah, like, so you have the ability now to basically return like a mailable instance, right, from your controller or from your route, right? And Laravel is going to detect that it's a mailable and it's going to render that to your browser, right? So before this change was introduced, you basically had to, if you want to see what that email looked like, right, you had to basically do the action, send off the email, and use a service like Mailtrap or whatever other one you would use, right, to actually visualize and see what that email template is going to look like, right? Now it's super easy. Like everything is so simple now.
Yeah, I agree. I love that a lot. And there's a lot of those little conveniences that come from people just using it, right? Like, oh, I don't want to have to send an email every time. So now it just rendered.
Yeah, and like
you're good.
The thing is, from some of the apps that I've worked on, that, I mean, the apps are literally on like 8. Whatever version it is now, right? People still forget, I think, to not say they don't know about the ability to render emails, right, to like the browser and like debug the design or layout of them. I see people constantly like doing the action, sending the email and catching it like in Mailtrap or something, where they could just use what they have already built in, right?
Yeah. And I mean, I'll be totally honest. I had forgotten that it existed.
Yeah.
And I'm glad you told me again, because I'm like, yeah, that is a basic and useful. And I wish I remembered to use it more often. So
yeah, I use it all the time. All the time.
That's great.
Yeah.
Okay, one last thing to dig in there. Oh, so I was going to mention that if you are kind of trying to get into specific mail building, it makes it super easy for you to attach files. Makes it super easy for you to embed raw data attachments. You can see all of this in the Laravel docs. And if you really need to, so we have hit moments at time where the abstraction doesn't give us access to some level of customization that we need.
You can also do that.
Yeah, you can actually get into the Swift message, the Swift mailer message, and actually customize the headers or whatever else. So there's a lot you can do.
Yeah, exactly. No. Yeah, so for example, on this Swift mailer thing, to me that's like a super like complex setup that you would actually have in order to have to do that, right? Because I've been working with mailables now for like the past 5 years, and I've never had to set anything on the Swift mailer, right? So it's nice that it's possible, right? Like if you ask me, I've never had to do it. Like the abstraction and everything that is provided is like so good that I've never have to reach for that level of like setup.
And that's my favorite kind of abstraction, right? Is that you almost never need to, but if you need to, you can do it. Because a lot of people who are critical of these types of abstractions say, well, what if I need to weird edge case? Well, you can do that. And I've had to twice, and I can't even remember what they were for, but I remember that it's only happened twice.
Yeah, and I mean,
so,
let's face it, like it's not everyone that needs to do it, right? It's good that it's there because if not, you're gonna have people complaining about it or whatever. But like, it's not all the time that anyone is gonna need to actually do that, right? But it's super useful that it is in your case.
Yeah. So if we were to talk about Markdown mailables real quick again before we get to notifications. So Markdown mailables, you mentioned a couple times that you are going to just write Markdown, and that Markdown is going to be basically rendered within like a pre-made template that Laravel provides. And it's, it is recognizable, but it's also just very good, like you said. There's one other thing. So what if I wanted to do anything specific within that Markdown that's more than just a link or a bold or something like that? What other features do we get from the specific Markdown parsing in the Laravel world?
Yeah, so like when I say like a Markdown file, you would think that it's a .md, right, extension, but it's actually a Blade file, right? So you have all the power of Blade within that. The only difference is Laravel has like this like templating engine, right, specifically for this, that recognizes the components that you use inside of that Markdown email, right? But you still have access to all the power of Blade, right? So anything you would do in a regular view, you could do in a Markdown mailable, because at the end of the day, it's just a regular view that has, or that can use a lot of like built-in components, right? That Laravel has. So I guess components is the key word here, because if you read the docs and whatever, you see this idea of Markdown emails, right? But it's really only Blade files, right, that use components that you could read about Blade components in the docs. But yeah, it's just components that Laravel knows how to basically convert those to HTML, right?
Yeah.
And have them be beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's great. Like, and if you were to read the docs and you were to see, it's going to show you that like the first thing you're going to look at is a component named mail : message. That : is similar to the dot, but it just means it's rendered from a package instead of from your local folders. But like Wilbur's saying here, the only special thing happening is that message component says, oh, all my content inside here is going to be Markdown, and then let's convert it to Markdown. But other than that, you're also using, and that's kind of where I was prompting you towards, is that there's other components that are made available to you, like the button component and the table component and the panel component, which are all just things that make it really easy to build relatively simple Markdown powered emails. And all those components are expecting that you're going to be passing them Markdown. And so in the end, they just render to HTML and then you're done.
Exactly. So, like, I mean, I'm not sure how many of the listeners have actually had to do a table in Markdown, right?
Yeah.
But it's not easy. Like if you mess up like a tab or a space or something, that could totally break like the entire layout, right? So these components that Laravel provides just makes working in Markdown and building like complex like mailable templates and other things super easy.
Yeah, definitely. So anything else you want to talk about with regard to mail or mailables before we move over to notifications?
I think one thing that would be very good to cover is that when we're talking about mailables, like there's different like drivers, I guess you could call them, right? That you could use to send your emails off, right? If you want to use like the most famous ones, I guess, are Mailgun. You have other ones, Postmark, I think is another one. You could also use like Amazon SES or SNS, I'm not sure what it's called.
SES, yeah.
But the thing that really blew my mind when I got started with Laravel is you have this SMTP driver, right? When you're just getting started, setting up a service like Mailgun or Postmark, where you have to go into like your domain like provider and set like DNS records and stuff, that to me was super confusing. It took me a while to like get a handle of that, right, in order to set all of that up. But my first Laravel email, I basically like sent that through my own Gmail account using the SMTP driver, right? And when I did that, that blew my mind.
Yeah.
Like, I used that for like the first year and I was blown away. Every email that I got from that app that I built, right? It was like insane how I could just basically add some credentials in my env and that's it. I was sending emails from this Laravel app using
it's like a superpower, right?
Using my Gmail credentials, which like it's crazy that you could get away with something so simple, right, for so long before I had to look into these API driven drivers.
Yeah. And I actually, I appreciate, first of all, it's a great tip. Second of all, I would say it's interesting because a lot of the times we assume that when you use a service like Mailgun or something like that, you need to use the APIs because the API exists here. Right? You can say, I want to use the Mailgun driver or whatever. What I found is that my life is almost always easier that if I'm using something like Mailgun or Postmark, I still use the SMTP driver.
Gotcha.
And so I don't like the frequency with which I actually customize the driver is really, really, really low. It's really almost always who am I using as a mail provider, grab the SMTP credentials from them, put them in the SMTP as if just like you did with your Gmail.
Yeah.
And then it's simpler because there's less moving parts. I'm still using this SMTP driver. The only difference is whose credentials and which domain did I pass into there.
Right.
So that's a cool transition too, is because you don't have to move from SMTP to now an API. It's literally just a different SMTP set of credentials.
For sure. Yeah.
But you're totally right, though. I would recommend that if you're listening to this, don't imagine Gmail as like a long-term solution. It's a way to see the magic, just like Wilbur was just talking about. But I think the easiest one I've found to just like set it up and get running is Mailgun. And I'm not saying it's the best. I'm not saying it's the most deliverable or whatever, but they've got a free tier. And if you are willing to do the work that Wilbur just talked about of getting your domain set up, and there's some text records you have to set up, so it's not as easy as Gmail. So that, don't get overwhelmed by this. Just start with what's simple. But if you're ready to go to that transactional way, just try signing up for Mailgun for a throwaway domain or something like that. Get it working. But so what do you use for your local mail testing? Just since we're in there, are you a Mailtrap guy or Mailgun or Mailhog or?
I used Mailtrap for like a very long time, right?
Yeah.
I tried Mailtrap. I mean, the Mailgun, I think it is, right?
Mailhog's the local
Mailhog,
one.
yeah, for a bit. But for the past, whenever released his app, Hello, I think it is, right?
Yeah, H-E-L-O.
Not sure how he pronounces it, but
yeah, I assume it's Hello. It might be. Yeah. I guess I don't actually know.
I'm not sure. Yeah, I call it Hello, but yeah, I've been basically using that from day one since he released it, right?
Love it.
Yeah, and I'm in love with it. Like I don't have to like log in to Mailtrap, right? And the thing with Mailtrap is it's a very good service, but you can only have this one inbox set up right at a time.
Unless you're paying.
Unless you're paying, yeah. Unless you're paying. I mean, let's be honest, someone that's getting started, right?
Yeah.
Like it took me a while to even consider paying for Mailtrap, right? But yeah, Mailtrap is the one that I use the most, but I've been using Hello or Halo, whatever you want to call it, for the past. Yeah.
Yeah, and if somebody's not familiar, it's basically like all these services are mail catchers, and what they basically are is like they give you some credentials and then they capture all your emails and they give it to you in something that looks like an email inbox, right?
Exactly. Like the email doesn't go off, say the address that like your user could have or whatever, right, in your database. Like it goes off to that service, they capture it, and you just log into their dashboard and you could visualize like the email.
Yeah. So I think that for me personally, the best thing for a team to share is either going to be Mailtrap paid, because your team can all be logging in and you can share access to it to your client, so they can go and take a look at it. But I think Hello Cloud has that as well. So I think that yeah. So if you pay for Hello Cloud, which you get for a year, so Hello costs $30 for the license. And then there's this Hello Cloud thing. I don't know how much that costs after your first year, but you get a free year of it. So that allows you to share it. So basically, if you're working with a team, you're probably going to want to use one of those. If you're just getting started, you might find that the $15 Hello license works. You might find that the free Mailtrap works. But there's also Mailhog, which is a locally hosted one, which I think you're going to get for free when you set up Laravel Sail. I think you get it on Laravel Homestead. If you're working on like a local development environment, more like Valet or something like that, Takeout has Mailhog as well. So just go check out takeout.titan.co, and if you get Docker up and running, you can get Mailhog working pretty cheap as well, or pretty easy. So if you want to pay money, if you're willing to pay money, if you're working on a team, look for Hello Professional, look for Mailtrap Professional, Mailtrap paid. If you just want to get it up and running and you want a local thing that you can preview without actually sending real emails, check out the $15 Hello license, or check out Mailhog. The easiest way to install Mailhog is Takeout, or if it already comes for free in your development environment.
Yeah. I actually had no idea Hello used like or had like a cloud service, so that's pretty cool.
Yeah, you get so if you pay for the $30 version, you get a year access to the cloud version, which allows you to share your emails out to friends. And then, but I don't know what the pricing is for Hello Cloud after your first year. So, but I'm sure that his website probably tells you about it. So,
yeah.
And this will all be in the show notes, everybody. So,
right.
All right, Wilbur, let's talk about notifications. So we've spent all this time talking about mail. It's really good, but I have found that more often than not, I use notifications. So let's talk about the notification system. What is notifications? Let's imagine mail's all done. What are notifications in Laravel? How do they work? How are they different from mail?
Yeah, so I guess the biggest difference with notifications in Laravel is that mailables are only email, right? Notifications, those could be a variety of different things, right? They could be email notifications, they could be SMS notifications, they could be Slack notifications, right? And the community has a lot of other drivers that you could just pull in and use those, right? But the neat thing about notifications is you could use more than one, right? You could have this notification that goes out to a user where you could send them an email, but also send them an SMS, right? So that to me is like the neat thing about notifications. And that is when I reach for notifications. Like I'm a bit different than you, I think here. Yeah. I tend to like stick to mailables most of the times, unless I need to send something to like two different like drivers, I guess,
channels,
right? Channels, correct. That is when I reach for a notification, right? If I only care about mailables, I never use notifications for different reasons, right? That I could probably get into here. But yeah, like notifications are good to me when I have to send to two or more channels.
Yeah. Right? Well, I do think, just before we actually dive into what notifications are, I would say that if you're doing mail and you're only doing mail, mailables are better than notifications because it's specifically built for the context of mail. So it's more robust in terms of templating and components and all that kind of stuff. So if you're just doing mail, mailables are better. The only reason that I default to notifications, and this is not an argument, but it's my specific context, is that I'm almost always sending transactional updates through a software as a service. And it's sort of like this thing happened or whatever. And what I've found is that more often than not, those type of really small things don't build on the usefulness of mailables. But often you find yourself saying, oh, you know what? I wish I could send that through Slack as well, right? So I think it's because of my context. I think if I were working on one app long-term or a few apps long-term, or the type of app that needs to send really rich emails, I wouldn't have this default. So it's definitely, I totally agree with you. It's very much based on the context that you're in.
Yeah, like I guess one thing we have to keep in mind is that you could use both. Like
for sure.
In a Laravel app, you're gonna have some mailables and some notifications, right? It's perfectly common to use both of them at the same time.
Yep. So let's talk about notifications. So just like we had with mail, it's going to be PHP artisan make notification. Let's talk invoice paid again, since that's where you went before. So if I run that, what do I get?
Yep, that gets you a new class, right? In-app notifications, right? A class you have there now is called invoice paid, where it's pretty similar to mailable, right? With the exception that since you have the ability to like send that notification to multiple channels, you now have multiple methods, right? You have to take into account for each channel you want to use, right? For example, when talking about mailables, you had this build method, right? Now with notifications, if you want to have that notification go out to like a mail, I think the method is to mail, right?
I think so, yeah. That sounds right.
And then the good thing about notifications also is that the same markdown emails that you could use in the mailables, you could also use those in notifications, right?
Right.
So like, it's just, to me, notifications are just like a good way to handle sending something to multiple channels, right? You could have all of the power of a mailable inside a notification also, like
and it could be multiple channels at the same time, but sometimes it's not multiple channels. So how do you define, when I'm sending a given mailable, which channels that send is using at that given moment? So in some of the apps that I've worked on, for example, you can imagine we have this app, right, that in the dashboard the user could go and like select, right, what channels they want to be notified by, right? So they could choose, I want to receive emails or I want to receive SMS, right? So then within that notification class that you create, there's always this channels methods, right?
or no, the method is called via or via.
Yeah.
Where there you basically return an array, right, of the channels you want to use. You could return there, for example, email, and then another key called SMS, right?
Right.
Where based on what you return for that from that via method, right, you have to have then the corresponding methods to build up that notification for that specific channel. So let's think of the example of invoice paid, right? Say we want to send this notifications to a user both to their email and to their phone number, right? So first we have this via method, right? That this is this has to return an array with like email and SMS, right? Inside that array, you also have to have now two methods. One, two SMS, and then the other one, two email, right?
Email,
so then
whatever it is.
In the two email, you could return a simple mail message and give it like the view you want to use, right? The markdown view. And the two SMS, this is where it gets like a bit, I guess, complicated. Not that much, but it's like an extra step you want to use, right? Where if you want to use SMS notifications, you have to pull in like a service of choice, right?
Yeah.
Like Laravel, before they shipped, I think it was like in 5.5, they shipped with like, I think it was Twilio and Nexmo. Like
Nexmo's in there now.
It is still.
Yeah, so right now it's Nexmo. I thought they'd gotten rid of it, but I just looked at the docs right now and it says to Nexmo. So there's actually no to SMS. It's right now it ships with Nexmo.
Gotcha.
But you can also use Twilio or whatever SMS provider
you
like
want. Again, similar to like the mailables, right? Like you have different drivers you could use based on like the community, right? Like packages they have created, right? So if you're not a fan of Nexmo, you could just pull in the Twilio SDK, right? And use that. So yeah, like it's super easy
there's this
to customize.
Laravel-notification-channels.com.
Exactly.
And it's got 52 channels. So you say you want Twilio, you just go up there, you type Twilio up at the top, and it helps you find exactly the instructions you need to do to choose Twilio instead of Nexmo or whatever else. Yeah.
And it's almost as easy as just configuring like the credentials for that service and like your services.php config, right? Setting some credentials in your env.
Yeah.
And in that channels, I think on most of the packages there that you could find, you have to return like an instance, right? You return like new Twilio SMS, and then you pass in like the body you want to use.
Nexmo message or whatever else it is. Yeah,
exactly.
That's good. So so we've got a notification called invoice paid, and again, I'm not going to describe exactly how to send them. Trying to describe text or code over a podcast is tough. Go check out the Laravel docs for that. But let's say, so we've new to one of these up. It says new invoice paid, but this invoice paid is notification instead of available. We got the instance in the invoice. We passed it in. We set it as an instance on the thing, just on the class in the constructor, and so now we have access to it. And so we've now got a to Nexmo and a to mail method, and then we've got a via method that allows us to return, maybe if we always return the same things, or maybe we return the same things based on some settings in the user or whatever that defines that when this thing is sent, what channels should it send through. What else is there interesting to do in notifications? Is there anything else we should be thinking about?
Yes. So like similar to how in mailables, right, you could basically route a mailable to an email address that's not in your database. You also have the ability to do that with notifications, right? Like you have this notification facade, right? That I think this, like the syntax of sending a notification to me feels so much cleaner than when sending a mailable, right? Because
I agree. Yeah.
In a mailable, you have to use the mail facade, and they have a to method where you either pass in a user or an email address, and then you call a send method, and you instantiate like the new mailable you want to send, right? And pass in any parameters to the constructor. With notifications, you have this notify method on a user, right? Where this is another thing you have to keep in mind is when using notifications, most of the time you're gonna want to like notify someone, right? And this someone is like an instance, mostly like a eloquent model, right? So there's this notifiable trait you have to use in that model, right? And then this trait basically gives you this notify method that you could call off of that user or whatever the eloquent model is, right? Where, for example, in this invoice paid, say like me or like whoever I want to send the email to whenever an invoice is paid, right?
Mm-hmm.
They are in the database, right? I fetch their record. I have the Eloquent model there. I call notify, and I just new invoice paid, right? And then I could pass in the invoice record there, and it's easy as that, right? No facades, nothing. Just super easy to whip up a notification and send it off to like a specific user. Now you have the notification facade that you could use that to basically route things or route notifications to different channels and specify like where you want to send that to. So for example, you could do notification : route, right? Give it the channel you want to send it off to, for example, Nexmo or Slack, right? And then in the example of Nexmo, you give it the phone number, and then you basically like fluently call the method notify and then pass in notification, right? You don't need like, you have the ability to use the notify method on like an Eloquent class, but you're not tied specifically to that, right? So that's like the beautiful flexibility that you get in notifications. You could use one or the other, whichever one is better, right? In that case.
Yeah. And also one of the cool things that comes from using the facade is if you say notification : send, if the first parameter of that method is maybe a collection of users, and then your second parameter is the notifiable, that makes it super easy to send a notification to all your users or all of your admins or all of your trial users or whatever. And I love that you're bringing this up. There's different ways to send these. And if you didn't follow what he said earlier, any model, which is going to tend to be your user model that has a notifiable trait on it, gets this notify method. So you could just say, user one, that's an instance, your Eloquent class, arrow notify, and then just pass in the notifiable. And so there's these really clean syntaxes that allow you to, whatever way makes most sense for the code you're writing, send these notifications. And I love what you called out there at the end, Wilbur, which is that one thing we often do is we send a notification not to a person, but to like an entity. And so I'll create an entity named Titan Slack channel or something like that, right? Exactly. Or just save a variable or whatever. And the whole concept around that is so that I'm sending a notification not to one of the people in my database, but just to a thing. And that thing might be, some credentials I saved that represent our ops channel. We'll often have an ops channel where every time something interesting happens on the SaaS, it'll send a notification, person canceled or person bought a thing or whatever. So there's a lot of flexibility you can use there.
Yeah. And like, for example, you could use the notification facade, as Matt said. If you have like a collection, right, of users or other entities, you could just do notification to pass in that collection, right? And then that's going to send that off to each record in that collection, right? So this is also, I guess, a good time to mention like a big difference between mailable and notifications when doing that, right? When like sending a mailable or a notification to like a collection of users, right? You have a to method on the mailable facade, right? But if you pass in like a collection of users into that to method, right, it's basically gonna send the same email off to like all of the records, right? So when you look at the email like in Gmail or whatever, you're gonna see all of the addresses, right, on that same email. So if someone was to reply,
are you really?
Yeah. So if someone was to reply to that email, right, and they click for by accident reply all or something, they're going to reply to everyone, right? Because the same instance of the mailable was sent to everyone. So this is
so you'd have to basically say to me and then BCC all those people.
Or you have to basically like loop over the collection of users you want to like send the mailable to, right? And then call like mail to, and basically instantiate the mailable for each one, right? Because if not, you run into that issue. And that's something that I've run into like a lot in the past, where I just assume that notifications work exactly as mailables, right? Or I mean that mailables work exactly as notifications, right? And it's not the case. Like, you shouldn't pass in like a collection of users to the to method unless, right, you want them all to get like the same instance.
That's good. And there's actually a spot in the docs here that says looping over recipients, and it says exactly what you're talking about. Unless you want them all to see each other's, things.
Yeah.
You do that, for each, and then for each one you're going to send one. Or if you don't mind that it just looks like a generic email that they got blind carbon copied, you could do mail to yourself and then BCC.
Everyone, correct.
Oh, good call. I think now that you're talking about it, I feel like I sort of knew that, but certainly have forgotten. So I really appreciate you bringing that up.
Yeah.
Okay, so we haven't talked about queues yet. I feel like talking about the specifics of how queues work is maybe a little bit beyond what we're going to be able to describe, like the interfaces and the blah, blah, blah. I think it's going to be really hard to follow on a podcast. So let's just say both mailables and notifications can be queued or not queued the way you want to do it. Is there anything else you'd want to say about queues, knowing that we can't really get into too much detail clearly in a podcast?
Yeah, I mean, like, to me, notifications were like the thing when I was getting started with like programming and Laravel, right? That they made sense to basically queue them up, right? Because if you're using like API drivers or like even SMTP, right? A notification is something that may take a bit of time, right? To actually send that, right? So you don't want your user to be waiting on that notification to be sent, right? You queue that up and then like let that take as long as it needs to.
Yeah. And it doesn't really matter that you get it sent immediately because everybody knows emails take a little while to get there anyway.
Exactly.
So nobody's going to complain.
Exactly.
Yeah, good point. Okay. So we've talked about routing. One of the things you mentioned, which I appreciate, is that you don't always have to do all the routing through the via method or whatever. You can also do it through specifically choosing a route, notification : route. And you can see examples of that in the docs as well. We talked about all sorts of different channels. Can we talk about two very specific things? They are the database driver and notification or broadcast notifications.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the database driver. I feel like that's a little bit different feeling than the rest of them. Can you talk about it really quickly?
Yeah. So like a good example that I use when like first starting to work with like the database driver is, I think in most of the apps, someone would log into now like social media accounts. Twitter is a good example, right? Where you have this notifications tab, right? Where you could see if someone liked your tweet, right? Or they left a reply or something. Doing something similar to that in Laravel is super easy with the database driver, right?
Yeah.
It's basically a way that I don't want this notification to go out to like an email, right? Or an SMS. I want this to be stored somewhere, right? So when my user logs back in, I could display him this notification and he could mark that as read.
Yeah.
He could delete it, right?
Yeah.
And Laravel offers not only like the ability to store notifications in a database table, right? But they also have like helper methods and everything to mark as read, right? To mark notification as read, to also get all unread notifications, right? For a user, right? That's not something that you have to manually do yourself, right? Yeah. Laravel has all of the helper methods in order to have that behavior work like as seamlessly and as easily as possible.
Yeah. And I think that we often forget just how, like, the number of times I've built or almost built before I could remember a system to just send the user notifications that are going to pop up at the top next time they log in or whatever, before remembering that this exists is embarrassing. So, all right, so let's talk broadcast notifications a little bit. We haven't done any conversations around Pusher or any of that stuff on the podcast yet, so I don't want to go too deep there, but I will just say to everybody, there's a concept called WebSockets. WebSockets are basically a way other than HTTP for your users to connect to your server. It requires you to have a WebSocket server running, but once you do, you can do much more like immediate things where the page doesn't have to reload for them to get a notification. So with that having been set as the basis, and I don't know whether or not I'll do another episode about that, but let's just assume that that's a known thing. Can you talk really quickly about broadcast notifications? Yeah.
So to me, broadcast notifications work very good with like database notifications also, right? Like if you want to store that thing in the database, you could also broadcast it, right? So then,
that's a good idea.
For example, say a user is already logged in, right? And we have like in our nav bar, we have like this icon, right? Of like a notification, right? And then you click that and you see a drop down of all of the notifications, right? For certain important things, say for example, invoice paid, right? That I'm getting money, right? So that's a super big deal on myself, right? So I want to be alerted in real time when that happens, right? So I have this notification and I have this interface, right, that I could just extend this should broadcast, right? Or you also have should broadcast now, right? There's like a small difference between the two of them. Should broadcast basically pushes that onto like a queue or something.
Oh,
and
got it.
Whenever it's possible to be broadcasted, it's going to be broadcasted, right? Should broadcast now basically just does the broadcasting right away, right? No waiting, no queue, no nothing. It like gives it priority over anything else that could be on there, right? And it just does that. So then I could, on my front end, right, have like a modal that listens to this event that was broadcasted, right? And show like a modal, right? Or pop up. Like one cool thing that I've done is with like the broadcasted notifications is that I've had in my front end something that listens to when this notification was broadcasted, and I popped some confetti, right? I think it was some kind of like giveaway app, right? That whenever someone placed like an order or something, if the user was logged in, they would see like a confetti pop up, right? So
very cool.
And when we're talking about like broadcasting notifications, I guess it's also good. And I'm not sure if you've already had someone on or you're going to have someone on to talk about Echo, right? Laravel
I don't think we've talked about Echo. I don't know if I actually planned it. I got to put that on my notes to make sure we talk about it.
Yeah, because like when trying to like listen to these types of broadcasted notifications and stuff in your front end, like Laravel Echo is like, I think the default thing you would use, right? Because it just makes it so much easier than, for example, setting up. Well, this is another good thing we have to mention is that if you want to broadcast notifications or any other thing in your app, you have to set up a service, right? That does like all of these WebSocket like things, right? Where you have different options, right. Like you have open source options, right? That are free. You could just set up a server, right? That uses WebSockets, and you configure Laravel to basically broadcast everything through that, right? But there's also like third party services like Pusher. Pusher is a very famous one that you could use. In my experience with Pusher, it could get very expensive, right?
Yeah.
Because like if you really broadcast a lot of notifications or events and stuff, like Pusher could get really expensive. And if I'm not mistaken, I think Marcel, like, that guy has a thing for everything. I think he has a Laravel WebSocket thing you could set up like your own server, right? Yep. In order to like use that instead of having to pay, right, for like another service. So I guess it's up to everyone, right? If you're willing to pay for this type of service to like not have like the overload or like the headache of managing it yourself, Pusher is a good alternative. But if you don't want to pay, there's ways, right, to set it up on your own and just use all of the power of WebSockets.
Yeah. And a quick note on broadcast. So that should broadcast and should broadcast now are things you can implement on events, but not on notifications. With notifications, you actually have an easier option, which is there's a notification channel. And so it's called broadcast.
That's right.
So if you say broadcast, so it's the same kind of concept, though. It's sending the thing out to the broadcast. If you say should to the broadcast channel, then you're just like everything else. You're creating a message that has information about it that goes out, and then you can use, just like you're saying, you could use Echo to capture those things.
That's actually right. Yep.
Sweet. I'm trying to see if there's anything else that I really wanted to get a chance. I mean, obviously, more than the usual, we've kind of just started by just talking about the thing. We talk about common use cases, and we've kind of gotten across those common challenges and gotchas. Maybe let's talk about that. So in notifications, have you noticed that there is anything in particular that people get stuck on, or that you wish they would know when they're first getting started using notifications?
So one thing that I guess made me like start defaulting to mailables, right, as long as I could, is there's this trait in Laravel, right, that's called serializes models, right? That you could use that in your mailable if you want to. And I think I'm not super familiar with it, but I think all it does is when you pass in, right, like an adequate model or something into the constructor, if you're using the serializes model straight, right, you don't store the entire payload of that record. Like if you're queuing the job, right, you don't store that like in the payload itself. All Laravel does is it just grabs like the primary key for that record, right? And then when that notification is ready to be sent, it basically fetches the user, right, or whatever record it is from the database. So you always have like a fresh instance of that user, right? Most of the time that's good. Yeah. Sometimes it's not. And the thing that has bit me a lot with notifications is that in mailables, if I don't want to use that behavior, right, that serializing behavior, I don't use the trait in my mailables, right? But since a notification class that you create extends like a parent notification, right? In Laravel, that parent notification class uses that serializes models trait, right? So when you're using notifications, you're stuck with using that behavior, right? Where sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not. In my example, I think the times it has bit me was when I had like this artisan command that ran like every minute or something, and it grabbed all of the users. I basically would then grab some other related models, right? Scope them down to something specific and append that into each one of the users, right? Because I wanted then my notifications to have access to only the things that job could get at that moment, right?
Right.
So then I passed that into the notification, but since it would serialize the payload, it would only store the ID and I wouldn't have access to the other stuff that I appended, right, onto
Got it.
So then when I tried to use it, it failed. It took me a while to figure out why. Yeah. Until I noticed, right, that the parent notification class uses that trait and then it basically enforces that behavior, right? So I'm a big fan of both, but I just stick with mailables as long as I could. If I need to send to multiple drivers, right, or channels, there's no way around it. Notifications are great for that.
Yeah. And I think my imagination says that if you were to find yourself in that situation in the future, you could potentially, in the constructor, take the relationships off and store them as their own properties, right? And then I think that'd be okay, but it is extra work that you wouldn't have to do otherwise. So that totally makes sense.
Exactly.
Okay. So are there any other things that we have not covered about mail and notifications that you want to make sure we get a chance to chat about?
I mean, there's a lot of like neat features and notifications. Like you could localize, right, notifications to like different languages if you wanted to, like, but like those are things that if someone really cares about, they could just read the docs, right? In my personal like experience, I've never had to like localize notifications. Most of the apps I work with are in English, right? But yeah, like there's the ability to do that. You could have like user preferred like languages, right? That you could just set up. But yeah, I think I've covered all of the things that I do like on a daily basis, right? With mails and notifications. Like I'm not a pro user at all with both of them, right? I use like the default things to just alert users or other records.
Too, so.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So if somebody wanted to learn more about these things, I mean, this is somewhat of a trite question at this point, but where would you send them to go?
I mean, I usually always have like 3 places, right? Number one, the docs. The docs are like fantastic. And I even think Taylor recently did like a walkthrough of the entire documentation, right? And I updated it because we had like a lot of methods that or like tricks and tips, right? That one would only know if you source dive like the code base, right? And found them. Now we have those in the documentation available. The second option is Laracast, right? He has like Jeffrey has a lot of videos about mailables and notifications, and obviously Laravel up and running is a great resource also. Yeah.
Well, thanks.
Yeah. I would know.
Yeah, you would know. You've read it more than anybody else.
For sure.
So.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. So let's talk about your personal fun moment. So you just got married recently. Congratulations.
It's actually almost been 2 years ago. No.
I was 2 years. I was just going to say, it's probably not actually that recent. It's probably about a year ago.
Yeah,
and
like,
2 years. Jeez, that's...
Yeah.
See, I feel old. Like I feel like I'm that guy who's like, I just remember when you were just this age or whatever. So you know...
Actually, the other thing is, in January now, we're having... It's our 2nd year anniversary, right? And in January now, we're expecting our first kid. So,
congratulations.
Yeah.
All right. So that's our fun moment. What are you most looking forward to about being a parent?
So being honest, like, I think I still feel like a kid myself, right?
Yeah.
So I'm just looking forward of like, I guess once he turns like 1 or something, right? When you could already walk, and like, start speaking and stuff, right? Where we could just play, like just play all day, just have fun.
I love that.
And like play games, like all kinds of sports. Like I'm just really looking forward to it. Yeah.
I love that. Yeah. When your kids start developing their own personality, for me, it was somewhere around 2 for both of them where it really hit that moment where I'm like, you're a real human. I can have conversations with you.
Yeah.
But the playing happened much before that. So
for sure.
Especially when they have like enough independence to want to like actually play games with you, like, and have their own independence there. I feel you. So
yeah,
that's
like,
awesome.
I'm looking forward to like the first months, obviously, right? But I'm much looking forward to like after the first year. Like,
yep.
That is when, to me, the most fun is going to start, right?
I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm totally with you on that.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, is there anything else you want to talk about today before we talk about how people can follow you and everything? Or you feel like we covered everything pretty well?
I think I covered most of the things that I do, on a daily basis.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if people want to learn more about you, they want to follow you, what's the best way to follow you?
I mean, if anyone wanted to follow for whatever reason, right, you could find me on Twitter, Wilbur Powery. I think we're going to link it in the show notes. Yeah. I have a blog. I almost never write on it. I just
but it'll be linked in show notes anyway.
It's going to be linked in the show notes. I'm on GitHub. You could follow me on GitHub. I don't do much open source work, but I try, to help around in some of the repos that I use a lot. Yeah. Twitter and GitHub is like the main places.
Awesome. Well, Wilbur, I really appreciate you taking your time to talk to us about this. I think this one is one of the ones where it's a little bit less about like the deep depths of it and a little bit more about just what is practical day-to-day usage of these systems looks like. And I think you really gave us a great, like, high-level understanding of just what it looks like to use these things day-to-day. So thank you so much for your time, man. I really appreciate you.
I'm happy to be on, Yeah. It's always fun.
All right. Yeah, for sure. Thank you, everybody, so much. And we will see you all next time. Thanks, Wilbur.
You got it. See ya.